On July 10th, 2022, at Miami International Airport, an unexpected situation unfolded that led to an unforeseen delay for Spirit Airlines' flight from Miami to Detroit. As all passengers were seated and the flight was preparing for takeoff, a woman appeared and began causing chaos. What happened next not only left those on board stunned, but it also created a dramatic, humorous, and tense showdown between her and the airline staff, as well as the arrival of the police. As the plane's doors were about to close, an angry woman, let's call her Sassy Sally, suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She walked in with a stormy expression, looking as though she was about to cause a tempest. Although the doors had closed and all the passengers were seated, Sally showed up at the end of the aisle, in a place no one thought anyone else could enter. No one expected a determined, seemingly ordinary woman like Sally to make a dramatic entrance at the moment everything was already settled. She didn't seem worried about missing her flight. Instead, with the confidence of an Olympic athlete, Sally darted down the aisle, seemingly unaware of any barriers. She ran hastily through the airport floor, disregarding the surprised looks from security personnel who were finishing the task of closing the plane doors. Sally had slipped past and managed to bypass security, all while the passengers were already seated and the plane was preparing to depart. With such speed, she almost resembled an Olympic sprinter, though no one knew what she was running for. Not to win, but to make everyone stop in their tracks. When the flight attendants noticed Sally's unexpected appearance, they were utterly stunned. However, maintaining their professionalism, they tried to stay calm and explained that the doors had closed and boarding had long ended. But Sally's face didn't change. She didn't seem flustered or scared at all. Instead, she appeared displeased by the denial. Her eyes flashed with anger, and though she tried to control her voice, there was an unmistakable force in her tone. She demanded to board the plane, treating the refusal as a personal insult. Both flight attendants tried to explain again that the doors had closed and couldn't be reopened, but Sally didn't listen. She looked at them as if she couldn't understand why everything seemed so simple. She had paid for her ticket, and she felt entitled to board no matter the situation. To her, it was an injustice she couldn't accept. In Sally's eyes, this wasn't a matter of refusal, but rather an excessive form of control. She started marching forward, pushing past the attendants and heading into the passenger cabin as though no one had the right to stop her. Passengers sitting nearby, initially surprised, now began to realize the escalating tension. Some even jumped up, trying to see what was happening, while the flight attendants struggled to block her. But Sally's determination made any attempt to stop her seem futile. Inside the cabin, Sally began searching for her seat, maneuvering around luggage as if she were competing for a prime spot in a race. The passengers, who had no idea what was going on, started to feel uneasy. Some whispered to each other. A few even pulled out their phones to record the scene, while others sighed at the waste of time. Once she was settled in her seat, sighing in relief as though she had just passed a major milestone in her life, the flight attendants quickly radioed their supervisor for assistance. This tense situation not only caused the flight to be delayed, but it also began to create an unsettling atmosphere on board. What started as a simple denial had now become a challenge for both passengers and airline staff alike. And just when it seemed that things were spiraling out of control, a tense confrontation was about to unfold between the stubborn woman and a system desperately trying to maintain order. But this was not the type of woman to easily accept rejection. With the force and determination of a bull charging forward, Sally pushed past the flight attendants without hesitation, as if social rules didn't exist in her small universe. Her movements were like a storm, sweeping everything in its path. The flight attendants, though trained to handle any situation, couldn't help but be stunned by her actions. One of them tried to stop her but was quickly shoved aside, and within moments, Sally had barged her way into the cabin. But she didn't stop at just bypassing the attendants. Sally began to greet the seated passengers, gently pushing them aside to clear her path, even climbing over a few seats to reach her place in row 23. The passengers nearby stared wide-eyed, unsure of what was happening, but they could feel the growing tension in the air. Some even started recording, as if they were participants in a reality TV show titled, "How to Turn Your Flight into a Nightmare." Sally was completely unfazed. She didn't feel like she was doing anything wrong. On the contrary, she felt like she was asserting a legal right. She had paid for the flight, and everyone around her needed to respect that. It was a declaration of power that Sally believed she rightfully deserved. She didn't even look back as she passed by each row, and despite many passengers around her showing signs of discomfort, Sally maintained a face, as if nothing could sway her from her goal. Inside the cabin, things grew even more tense as she began searching for her seat. However, when she couldn't find the spot she expected, Sally didn't stop to ask for assistance from the flight attendants. Instead, she shoved a passenger's seat aside to make room for herself, even though the person had been settled in for some time. "Get up! I paid for this seat!" Sally shouted angrily, as if the entire plane belonged to her. Every action she took was like a slap in the face to order and airline rules. She wasn't just violating security protocols, she was intruding into the space of other passengers. People around her began whispering to each other, with stunned and annoyed looks directed her way. But Sally, once she set her mind on something, was unstoppable. She even flashed a victorious grin, as though she was triumphing over a challenge, or like a warrior who had just conquered the world to claim her seat. At this point, the contrast between Sally's defiance and the professionalism of the flight attendants was clearer than ever. The attendants tried to reason with her, patiently explaining that the boarding time had ended and she could no longer board. But every time they spoke, Sally dismissed their arguments, not only refusing to listen, but pushing things further. She wasn't just rejecting the refusal. She was challenging the people who were simply doing their jobs. She became the center of attention, and like a character in a comedy show, she didn't realize she had become the cause of inconvenience for the entire flight. A situation full of contradictions and frustration was beginning to take shape. The passengers were confused and couldn't understand the bizarre scenario, while the flight attendants seemed trapped between maintaining order and preserving the airline's reputation. And Sally, steadfast in her demands, continued to insist on her rights, making everything even more complicated. She wasn't just delaying the flight, she was creating a small storm in what was supposed to be a calm and peaceful space for everyone. What had once been a straightforward journey from Miami to Detroit had now turned into a stage for a confrontation between Hurricane Sally and the system of airline rules. The flight attendants, clearly shocked by Sally's behavior, immediately radioed the supervisor for help. Yet Sally had no intention of backing down. On the contrary, she became even more stubborn and determined. Her face remained unchanged, and a victorious smile spread across her face as she arrogantly declared, "I paid for my ticket, I'll sit where I want, and if you try to stop me, I'll sue." Her words sounded as if she were auditioning for a role in a courtroom drama, where the protagonist continually asserts their rights with sharp, defiant rhetoric. The entire cabin seemed to freeze in that moment. Passengers couldn't help but look at Sally, some with worry, others finding it amusing, but all feeling the suffocating tension in the air. It seemed that Sally not only wanted to sit in her seat, but also wanted to prove that she was the winner in an imaginary legal battle. She wasn't just arguing with the airline staff, she was fighting the entire airline system itself. But the flight attendants were not easily intimidated. They maintained their professional demeanor and continued to explain that she was late, and allowing her to board at this point was impossible. However, Sally paid no attention to reason. She didn't think she was doing anything wrong. "I paid for my ticket, so I have the right to be on this flight," she continued to shout, creating an unforgettable commotion. She wasn't shy about yelling at the attendants, and even brought up the threat of lawsuits. What was remarkable was how Sally turned this tense situation into a personal drama. She began to create a performance right in the middle of the cabin, where no one expected a routine flight to turn into such a dramatic dispute. She was like the leading actress, delivering sharp lines and constantly emphasizing her rights. Each sentence she spoke was with confidence, as if she were in a courtroom, where she held all the power. Sally had transformed the flight into a personal battle, where every intervention from the airline staff was a form of oppression that she needed to stand up against. The situation became even more tense when the supervisor arrived. Surely no one on the flight crew had imagined they would have to deal with such a stubborn passenger. Nevertheless, they remained calm, and the supervisor tried once again to explain the situation. But Sally refused to back down. She just sneered, paying no mind to the reasonable arguments from the staff. "I don't care what rights you have. I'm sitting here, and there's nothing you can do about it," she declared, as though the entire flight belonged to her. The passengers began to feel like mere background players in this drama. Some were annoyed, others worried, as the tension grew, while a few just looked on in amazement and shook their heads. All of them were caught up in Sally's storm, but none dared to speak out or intervene. The flight attendants, though accustomed to handling unexpected situations, couldn't have imagined a passenger would drag the entire flight into such a tense confrontation. Sally refused to give up. Each word she spoke was like an attack on those trying to handle the situation. She wasn't just arguing with the attendants. She added fuel to the fire by berating other passengers, claiming they didn't understand what she was going through. "Everyone is silent, but you don't know what I'm dealing with," she shouted, as if advising those around her rather than listening to the staff's instructions. Everyone stared at her with confused looks, but no one dared to speak. The situation became more chaotic as the staff had to decide whether to continue this confrontation or not. However, they understood that once Sally was determined not to give up, confronting her further would only make things worse. So, people began to sigh, some shaking their heads, and all waited for the police to arrive and resolve the issue. Sally remained unfazed, as if this was just a game she was destined to win. At this point, things were spiraling out of control. The flight attendants, now feeling like characters trapped in a bad sitcom, decided to call for backup. The airport authorities were informed, and the situation escalated when they told Sally that she was trespassing on an airplane. But that didn't faze Sally. Oh no. She dug in her heels, insisting that she was perfectly entitled to stay on the flight, just like everyone else. The audacity of it all was astounding. When the police arrived to escort her off the plane, Sally became a human roadblock, arguing at full volume. "I'm not going anywhere. I paid for my ticket, and I'm sitting down," she screamed, as if she had just invented air travel. Meanwhile, passengers were texting their loved ones to inform them they might need to take a later flight, thanks to one woman's dramatic stand for her so-called rights. As the tension mounted, the flight attendants and passengers were instructed to disembark the plane so they could remove Sally, because apparently her airline rebellion had reached new heights. The delay was stretching on longer than a DMV line, and everyone was getting more frustrated by the minute. Sally, however, was unfazed, still making excuses and defending her actions as if she were the hero in this story. Eventually, after several attempts to reason with her, the police decided that enough was enough. They arrested her for disorderly conduct and destruction of aircraft. Her response? "I'll beat the case! Watch me!" she hollered, like some kind of courtroom superstar. In the end, she was carted off the plane in handcuffs, leaving behind a group of passengers who were no longer concerned about the delay, but rather about how they were going to explain this whole fiasco to their bosses. The woman arrested and charged later claimed in court that she was wrong, but still insisted that the flight crew should have been nicer to her. After all, she was just trying to catch her flight. And as if this weren't enough, it turned out this wasn't her first brush with the law. She had previously assaulted an employee at a fast food restaurant over, of all things, cold fries. Sally was sentenced to probation, though she probably thought she could beat the case again. Let's just hope her next flight involves fewer dramatic entrances.